All right, we're taking a look today at a community aquarium that also serves as an Amano shrimp grow out for my juvenile Amano shrimp. And there's a couple different types of nano fish in here. So it's also triple duty as a community aquarium. And the first thing you'll notice here as you take in all the sights that there is to see with everything going on in this big aquarium is that there's no substrate. I'm growing several different kinds of aquarium plants, stem plants, floating plants, slow growers, fast growers. And I'm doing that without using any substrate at all. Typically on social media, from guru channels all the way down to brand new channels created by a brand new aquarist, you're going to find people in this hobby that are simply parroting each other. That's a nice way of saying they're copying each other. And what I mean by that is most of the science in the aquarium hobby behind planted aquariums is just nonsense. Today in this video, I'm going to break down why the planted aquarium niche is full of bro science. And I'm going to show you proof of why that is. And we're going to talk about ways that you, as an individual planted tank owner, whether you've got a planted tank that you're looking to put together as your first fish tank, maybe you've already got a beautiful aquascape set up right in your living room, or maybe you've got a rack just filled with planted aquariums. In this video, I'm going to explain to you exactly how you can avoid substrate if you want to. Now, first things first, what I want to get into here is different kinds of substrate. Now, I'm not against using substrate. I've got to clear the air up front. I use substrate in a lot of my aquariums. You'll see here right to the right of the aquarium that we're showing, I've got one small nano tank with gravel. I've got another small nano tank next to it with aqua soil. So for many years, I have experimented with different types of substrates. I've watched all the videos from the gurus explaining why different substrates do what they do, why you need them, why you should avoid different substrates. And I've taken all of that advice and that explanation and the jargon, and I've applied it to what I consider a very unique style of planted aquarium. There isn't another channel on YouTube that is doing an aquascape like this. I am the only one. And I know what you're thinking. Well, you're also the only one that's breeding colorful Amano shrimp. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Now, I didn't set out originally just to try to do aquarium stuff differently than everyone else. What I've done is simply taken a common sense approach to how aquarium plants grow. The science between how aquatic plants grow is real. It's something that has been documented for pretty much a century at this point, and it's nothing new. We've known for a long time that aquarium plants or aquatic plants grow much differently than land plants or terrestrial plants. So I'm going to break that down for you in this video. And I really think it's probably going to open up your mind as to how some in the hobby have decided to take plant science that has nothing to do with aquariums and twist it to sell products. From those videos that we, as the common fish keepers of the world, we perceive those larger channels that have quote unquote authority because they have tons of subscribers. although they don't have a lot of views in 2026. Those channels we have perceived as just the ultimate source of information. And over the years, what we found is that some of these channels are just kind of plugging scientific names of plants over and over again, or they're plugging scientific names of fish, or even both, in an attempt to simply sway the algorithm to put their videos into the educational bucket of the niche. And the reason for that is very simple. Educational aquarium videos pay more per ad than regular tank updates. That's right. There's a game being played on YouTube and probably other social media. I don't really watch aquarium videos outside of YouTube, and I'm assuming most of you don't either. But there has certainly been a game being played for years now with these channels trying to come off as educational. So, what I would challenge you to do as a viewer is when you start searching for things, it's a little easier on a computer or maybe on a tablet than your phone, but it's totally doable on a phone. However, it is you're going to search. When you start searching for things, pay attention to when the video was made. And if you're able to watch a video on a particular subject and that video is, let's say, 10 years old, you're going to notice a completely different style that creators had 10 years ago when it came to showing their aquariums on YouTube. What has happened is creators have kind of been influenced. You could even say they've been tricked into thinking that every video they make needs to be an educational video. And they're tricked into thinking that all their viewers are brand new and they need to teach someone that's brand new everything about the aquarium, as if grown humans aren't able to Google things, and as if grown humans are not searching for stuff and taking in information other than their particular YouTube channel. And so, a great example of that, I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus here, but I will talk about a creator that I've been watching for a couple years. And it's actually been quite hilarious for me to kind of see the arc that his channel has gone on. And I think this happens to a lot of us in the hobby. So, when he started out, the big trend on YouTube from some creators was negative sentiment. And what the negative sentiment arc was, is creators would come out with videos that they were sure that that video was going to piss you off as a viewer. They would come out with videos, and you're about to know exactly what I'm talking about. They would say, if you add this magic dust to your aquarium, by golly, you'll never need to change the water again. Your aquarium will just start cleaning itself. You won't have to change the water. Just add this magic dust to your aquarium. By the way, it's magic dust that I sell on my website. So, does that ring any bells? That same type or style of creator that was popular just a few years ago, they've found themselves now in a ghost town in the comments and the views of those kind of videos. And for the most part, they've given up. You don't really see any creators in 2026 pretending that water changes are some great war or some great debate or battle taking place in the comments. And the reason why you're not going to see that is because the algorithm has gotten smart enough to start disregarding those videos that are based on negative sentiment. Something that came out of those videos in particular that never really existed in the aquarium niche prior to that is the idea of what's called a natural aquarium. Now, don't get that confused with what we've commonly called a nature aquarium in the niche. You see, the nature aquarium is a term that is coined by and used often by the aquascaping community. The nature aquarium is supposed to be a slice of nature. It's supposed to appear as if you just literally sliced a section out of a creek or a river or for the saltwater guys, even a slice of the ocean like your corals. And it's a aesthetic thing. It's a visual thing. When you see a nature aquarium, it looks more natural than aquarium with, just as an example, confetti colored gravel and a bunch of obviously fake plants. When you see an aquarium, for instance, disregard the reflective bottom of the tank here. Obviously, there's not glass bottoms in a river, and disregard the moss dome that I've got the pearlweed stuffed in there. But when you see an aquarium that has these stones in it that have a natural appearance with moss growing next to them, or even algae covering some of the faces of the rocks, and you see these various live aquarium plants thriving in and around those rocks, it gives the human perception the idea that this is natural, as opposed to a more barren tank like this one here. This has just literally got kind of a sponge filter as the main feature of the tank. And although there are some plants growing out of the sponge there, the barren moss domes that I have that are slowly growing Susswassertang out of them, that's an experiment that I've got going on the side. This doesn't give you the appearance of nature. This looks like some sort of industrial plant growth experiment, right? As opposed to a more natural look. Okay. So even though it was a little long-winded, that's the explanation of the nature aquarium. Okay. I know it's confusing, a nature aquarium versus a natural aquarium. The hobby has done this to itself. So you've got to understand that the natural aquarium is the idea, according to these creators that are pushing the quote unquote natural aquarium. It's the idea that adding a certain kind of substrate to your aquarium somehow makes it less maintenance, because there's a certain kind of stuff down in the bottom of this glass box. Somehow you'll have to clean it less. Now, I don't have a doubt in my mind that regular, sane adults understand that if you have a 10-gallon tank with 20 fish in it, it's going to accumulate more fish poop than a 10-gallon tank with 2 shrimp in it, regardless of what's in the bottom of the aquarium. Now, once you get a little more experienced with aquariums, or you've been around the hobby long enough, you start to understand a little more nuanced topics like TDS and pH and things like that. What you really, at some point, kind of light bulb moment that happens with a lot of aquarists is that no one person can sit on a live stream or can make a long form video and claim to be able to predict what's going to happen in every aquarium or even most aquariums, because they're all so different. The amount of plants in the aquarium is different, the type of substrate, how often the individual aquarist might clean that aquarium, the amount of livestock in that aquarium. These are all things that are highly variable, and no one aquarist can even predict what's going to happen or apply the same rules in most cases between two aquariums in the same fish room, in their own fish room, let alone making bold claims about aquariums that belong to people they've never met. They may not have a single clue as to how that person, that viewer, is actually running their aquarium. They have no idea what the water parameters are of that viewer. And the best way to explain a situation like that is when a creator decides to make a video about TDS. TDS is a very complicated subject, it's very nuanced. But to break it down for the simple man or woman like me or you, TDS is the junk that's in your aquarium other than water. That's really what it comes down to. It's the stuff that's in your aquarium other than water. It's the total dissolved solids. Okay, let me get this cord out of the way here. But so the TDS of our aquariums can be highly different between mine and yours. And one of the main reasons for that is my tap water is typically over 1,000 TDS right out of the faucet. And what you'll find a lot of these creators doing when they do a TDS video, because they think that that's what they need to make, it's not that they're really trying to teach anything or explain anything. What they'll say is, don't worry about TDS. Now, that might work for them. They may have tap water in which the TDS is at a reasonable level to grow plants or to own shrimp. But for someone like me who on a bad day, my TDS is upwards of 1,500, and that's minerals. Those are minerals and stuff in the water. You will not have a good experience with a 1,500 TDS planted aquarium or a 1,500 TDS shrimp tank. It's simply not compatible with plants or shrimp. So if you just blindly follow these creators who make videos about TDS because they just want to have those keywords in their repertoire, as opposed to making a video about TDS that actually explains TDS to you and tells you, hey, the meter's, $10 on Amazon. Don't go off what my TDS is because I don't live next door to you. Test your own aquarium's TDS. And if it's below, let's say if it's below 400, you don't have as much to worry about. If it's above 1,000, well, you're probably going to need to mix in some RO, get that TDS down, or there's only a few types of fish that you should be keeping. I mean, this is common sense for those of us that are experienced in the hobby. But for new fish keepers, it's incredibly misleading. And to create content that you yourself has decided is geared toward new fish keepers and give them that kind of bad advice is just not a good thing to do, in my opinion. So things like that in the hobby have kind of shaped me into the type of creator that is willing to experiment with methods that the top channels say won't work or that the top channels simply ignore. In my experience, those methods are often the easiest to do. They just don't sell products. So that leads me into our discussion today, which is how I grow different aquarium plants, like these beautiful crypts that you see. Those are typically a plant that is considered more advanced for some reason, right? So I've got some brand new crypts here. This is crypt, hard to say. So I'm not going to say the full scientific name, but we'll call it Hygrophilia chai. Okay. I'm going to leave some words out there because I'm not bound by needing to say every scientific name in the world for the algorithm. But if you look up Hygrophilia chai, it's probably going to autocorrect it to be in that pink plant. Those are brand new. I got those out of a tissue culture. And let me see if I can zoom in or get close enough here to show you how I'm growing them in this no substrate aquarium. But there's simply a tiny little snip, a little piece of a plant weight that I cut off of a long ribbon of plant weight, and I clamped it over a piece of these individual crypts roots. And then I dropped them in the aquarium. There's no 2 hour long explanation needed, talking about every scientific word available to me. There's no typically these guys, for whatever reason, they don't actually show what they're doing. They just talk. So I'm not gonna even do a bunch of talking about it because it's just not that complicated. I'm taking these plants and I'm weighing them down in the aquarium, just like that pearlweed. Now, pearlweed is one that at this point in the hobby cannot be denied that it's easy to float in an aquarium. You'll often see people floating pearlweed. Now, one of the main reasons why you can and should float pearlweed as opposed to a crypt is the pearlweed is made up of a bunch of tiny, tiny little stems, and there's like thousands of them, right? So it doesn't really matter if that pearlweed kind of gets tumbled around in different positions at the top of your aquarium as it floats around. it's going to turn into a giant mass, a giant bush of floating pearlweed. A crypt, on the other hand, is going to grow into just a gnarled version of a stem plant because it's typically one main stem. Now, you can have a crypt plant that grows several stems, but it's never going to grow exactly like pearlweed. Pearlweed is more of a weed, and a crypt is typically a single stem or a couple stems per node of the plant. So if you float a crypt, what happens is if it grows towards the light in one direction and then the current, or maybe you reaching in to try to take a fish out or whatever the case may be, if you get that crypt kind of tumbled in the opposite direction, the stem is going to start curving and growing in another direction. And what you end up with when you float a crypt plant is typically a plant that is grown into a weird jumble. And so if you ever go to plant that crypt into the substrate, it's not going to be a straight stem at that point, and it makes it much more difficult to plant, and it looks pretty weird. Okay. So, can you float a crypt? Absolutely. You can float crypts all day long, and they will grow perfectly fine in your aquarium floating. That crypt right there does not care that the roots are not in substrate. The crypt has no care in the world. The only thing that these aquatic plants, and that is both fully aquatic and that includes amphibious plants, like some floaters we would find, like duckweed or maybe red root floater, where the top of the plant is out of the water and just the roots are in the water. All of these plants are designed to take in nutrients from the water. One of those things that people in the hobby parrot off of each other as well, if that plant has big roots, it's a heavy root feeder. It's simply not true. Well, that plant doesn't have a lot of big roots, so it feeds a lot through its leaves too. Well, why are you saying that? Because you just looked at it and you see a lot of roots? Have you done any actual scientific testing on the plant? No? Huh. That's weird. So why make the claim? Is it because the video that you watched before said that? Uh-huh. Yeah, typically. These creators have absolutely no idea what percentage of this crypt is taking in nutrients through the leaves versus the roots. Not only that, but they're not willing to admit that these plants can change how much nutrients they take in through the roots or through the leaves based on their environment. Aquatic plants are surrounded in water, and that is the main difference between an aquatic plant and a terrestrial plant. So let me break this down a little differently, and I think this will be a way that will make a lot of sense to a lot of people. And we'll do this while we look at this beautiful pink plant with the heavily pregnant Amano shrimp behind it. So we'll use this plant as an example. As you can see, this plant is planted. It's in aqua soil. Now, even though most of the plant is above the substrate, I used the same exact method for these plants in this tank than I used when I took them out of the tissue culture and put them in the bare bottom aquarium that we started the video with. So what are the roots doing in this substrate that's different in the aquarium with no substrate? Nothing. They're not doing anything differently. You see, this substrate is surrounded in water. There's water in between every single piece of substrate. And what's different about aquarium plants versus a land plant is that land plants, their roots are not often completely submerged in water. A terrestrial plant's roots is usually in dry soil or dry substrate, and it'll be surrounded in water when it rains, but then that rain dries up. Most land plants or terrestrial plants, if their roots become submerged in water for extended periods of time, they melt away. Pothos is a great example of this. Now, many of us start a pothos plant in our aquarium from a cutting off of the vine of a pothos plant. If you go to Home Depot and you buy a potted pothos plant, and you wash all of the dirt away from the roots and you put it into your aquarium, those roots are going to melt because they were grown in dry soil. Why did they melt? Because the pothos has to grow special roots designed to take in nutrients while submerged in water. So when you take a cutting of a pothos plant vine and you stick it in an aquarium, those roots that grow off of that pothos plant are designed to grow submerged in water. They're completely different roots than a land plant's roots. So that's the first thing. Now, another thing we're going to talk about is how aquarium plants and land plants eat. How is it that they take in nutrients from the water? So, both aquarium plants and land plants both need nutrients. They need water, they need light, and they need nutrients. So, when it comes to your aquarium plants and their roots, if the water that's surrounding the plant is higher in nutrients than the plant itself, it just soaks in the water and takes in the nutrients from the water. Now, when you water a terrestrial plant, let's say you have a rose bush. If you put that rose bush in the desert and it never gets any water, it's going to die. That's the way that land plants work. Now, they are able to get some nutrients directly from the dry substrate, and they do that with a process called active transport. The plant has to use its own energy to basically do teleportation of those nutrients from the dry substrate into the plant's root. It takes energy for the plant to grow this way, and the plant's not able to grow as well because it's using energy to take in the nutrients. Now, when you water your plant or when it rains, that water strips nutrients from the substrate and delivers it inside the water to the plant roots. And plants, whether they're above or below the water, they need that type of food. And without it, they're not going to survive. When plants get their nutrients directly from water, that's called passive transport of nutrients. And what that means is that the plant does not have to use any of its stored energy to get those nutrients. So the energy that that plant would normally use to grow, it's going to have all of the energy. Instead of having to take a percentage of that energy and put it into teleporting nutrients from dry substrate, the plant's able to just allow that water to soak into the roots, to soak into the leaves. Plants have a cell membrane that allows water to pass directly through, and that doesn't take any energy from the plants. Now, everything I just said is known science about aquarium plants. This has nothing to do with the aquarium hobby. This has to do with humans' scientific study of plants. So, what happened that changed science between what we know, the factual information about aquatic plants and land plants? What changed that humans started explaining how plants eat in a different way when it comes to aquariums? Well, first off, an aquarium with no substrate at all and plants in it is something that you don't often see. That's kind of my bang zone for how I run aquariums. I do a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't do, and it works great. So, a bare bottom or no substrate aquarium like this, as you'll see, has a bunch of detritus. And in this hobby, they would love for you to only associate bare bottom aquariums with quarantine tanks or with monster fish tanks that don't have any plants. They are afraid that if everyone knew, if it was just common knowledge that that poop that you see down in the bottom of this aquarium is what grew all of your aquarium plants, everything would change. And so they're not going to explain it that way. They're just not. Now let's look at aqua soil again, because I want to make a point here that simply cannot be argued about aqua soil. Aqua soil is an invention that the creator of aqua soil is not shy about the fact that everything about this aqua soil was borrowed from bonsai soil. That's right. In Japan, they based aqua soil for aquariums off of bonsai soil. Now we have a aquarium substrate that's based off of terrestrial plant science, right? And that's really kind of the very top tippy point of the misinformation that gets pushed down in the planted tank hobby. And that includes the aquascaping realm as well. These top creators are not going to be honest with you about how aquarium plants actually grow because it would completely dismantle the aquascape substrate explanation. And for a lot of the creators who don't have any skin in the game, they don't start off a video with 40 different sponsor logos flashing in front of you. They're just simply regular people who might have an aquascape, right? But they also create YouTube content. It's hard for someone that has just copied off whatever the big channels say for years to suddenly accept the reality that everything they've been taught is based on a different kind of plant root than what's in their own aquarium. It's a hard thing to do to come to that realization. I wasn't born understanding how aquarium plants grow. I didn't just come out of the womb knowing that aqua soil was invented, borrowing all of its science backed nature, right? The whole reasoning for aqua soil is just copy pasted from bonsai plants. I wasn't born knowing that, right? But I didn't invent that. That's the truth behind what aqua soil is. It is what it is. And so you've got a whole segment of the aquarium hobby that's selling a lot of expensive products, that's selling a lot of gear, that's pushing a lot of technical jargon and making this sound really, really complicated to grow plants, right? You've got them basing everything they're talking about off of a type of nutritional uptake of our plants that's not preferred by the plant. The plants don't want to get their nutrients from the substrate. If your aquarium plant has to get nutrients from the substrate, that means that you probably don't have any livestock. So that's the next thing we're going to get into here is what's actually feeding the plants in your aquariums. And this is what allows those creators and the industry as a whole to explain how aquarium plants eat in such a poor fashion that goes against known science. That's all that poop in the bottom of your aquarium. Now, when you're brand new to the hobby and you're not really used to an aquarium that has a bunch of poop in the bottom of it, your initial instinct is to remove that poop. Why wouldn't it be, right? It's like a litter box. You wouldn't just let your cat box fill up with poop. But that poop is what's growing your aquarium plants. And I can prove it, but more importantly, you can prove it at home. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So, what I want to get into here is detritus, mulm, fish poop, that fluffy brown stuff that's at the bottom of our aquariums. You see it here, and it doesn't really get explained fully in the aquarium hobby. And what I mean by that is it gets dismissed in most aquariums. When we're talking about aquarium plants, when detritus or mulm or fish poop or shrimp poop, whatever you want to call it, snail poop, a lot of times when it gets brought up in relation to aquariums that have a substrate that's not what we call active substrate, meaning it's not aqua soil, right? There's all this talk about how aqua soil is better than gravel because it has nutrients and it has charged particles, right? That those charged particles are part of that active transport that your aquarium plants prefer not to do. They don't want to use energy to get nutrients. They want the nutrients to be dissolved into the water. They want liquid fertilizer. Okay. Now, if you've got 3 inches of substrate that your plant's roots are in, there's no circulation through that substrate. The water down there is stagnant. So, if you've got a bunch of detritus that's trapped in between pieces of gravel, that detritus is constantly being broken down into the water surrounding the plant roots by decomposer bacteria, by seed shrimp, by little creepy crawlies, but also by actual decomposer bacteria. Whenever they say, and this is another thing people just repeat over and over again, you need beneficial bacteria in your substrate. There's no water flow in your substrate. So the bacteria that turn nitrogen and things like that, ammonia in your water into harmless things, or that do the the nitrogen cycle in your aquarium, they're not in your substrate. They're on your filter media. They're where flow is. The bacteria that are in your substrate are typically decomposer bacteria because all the poop and the waste in your aquarium floats down to the bottom. Now, when it comes to the poop in your aquarium, something you can do, which I've already done for me, I won't say I've already done it for you because the composition of the detritus of your aquarium is going to be different than mine, right? But what I've done, and I'll tell you all about it here, is I took some of this fish poop, this waste in my aquariums, and I sent it off to a special lab that specializes in testing wastewater and soil for all of the nutrients inside. That's right. And so, just from having the little nano fish you see scurrying around in here, and snails and shrimp, my fish poop got tested by a soil and analysis lab, and it has nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, sodium, iron, manganese, zinc, copper. Can you believe that? It has every single mineral, nutrient needed for plant growth. So that means that regardless of what kind of substrate I put in here, there's going to be waste from my livestock that's feeding my aquarium plants. The root does not have to be touching the waste. The waste is getting broken down into the water column by decomposer bacteria. The life inside my aquarium that's swimming around or walking around on the bottom is circulating the water. Now, I do have sponge filters running that are doing more circulation than that. But either way, the nutrients are being broken down out of the waste of the aquarium into the water column, and that feeds your plants. So for a creator, and most of these guys that love to talk about how either dirt or now the discussion highly suspect is going to start leaning towards aqua soil this year. But when these guys are explaining that, typically their tanks are overstocked with different kind of fish because they're on this quest to say every scientific name in every video, right? They're chasing the title game and the algorithmic push of educational content. But what they're not really focusing on is their aquariums creating all of this plant food automatically, regardless of if you have aqua soil or rocks like gravel or whatever it is that you've got in your aquarium. Creatures like this one here are pooping. And as they poop, It's floating down to the bottom of the aquarium. When it goes to the bottom of the aquarium, it gets broken down by bacteria, and those nutrients are released from the waste into the water column where they're then available to your plants. That's it. That's the entire explanation of how your plants eat. Now, there are times where you're going to have too little or too much aquarium waste. How do you know when you have too much? Well, typically the water's going to start getting dirty looking, the actual water clarity itself. You'll obviously notice a heavy buildup of detritus, right? You'll start growing algae. Algae will just naturally appear out of thin air because there's too much nutrients in the aquarium. And so when you end up in a position where you have too much detritus in an aquarium that has gravel, you can gravel vac it. But if your gravel's full of plants, it's pretty hard to gravel vac. So that's one of the upsides for me of keeping plants in a tank with no substrate is it takes me about 10 seconds to move all of the stuff in this aquarium over to the other side and vacuum out the detritus and then move it back. It's easy. It's simple. Why aren't any creators in the entire aquarium hobby trying to push a setup that's 100 times more simple to clean? It's because they have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to how aquarium plants grow. And they've convinced themselves, and they've let other creators' videos convince them that aquarium plants need substrate, that there's some relationship between the roots of your aquarium plants and the physical substrate. Again, the only time that happens with an aquatic plant root, the only time an aquarium plant root is going to physically take nutrients directly from substrate is if you don't have enough nutrients in the water column. So let me give you a great example of a case where that would happen because it has happened to me. Again, I'm not against substrate. I'm not against fertilizer. But let's be real. Most of us have a level of livestock in our aquariums that'll completely support plant growth. Even in a jungle tank, if you've got enough fish and shrimp in there, you don't need to put a drop of fertilizer. You don't need to put any root tabs. But the companies that sell the fertilizer, the companies that sell the root tabs, they'll tell you to put one root tab every 3 inches the day you set up the tank or the plants won't survive. It's simply not true. If you don't believe me, take a cutting of pothos and put it in a glass of tap water. Completely change the tap water out once a week. Don't ever add a single thing to it. And what happens? Big, long, nice roots grow, and the pothos plant thrives off of tap water. How? I don't know. Nature finds a way. So if a vine off of a pothos plant can do that, why do we need the entire bottom of our aquarium filled with aqua soil when our plants prefer to take their nutrients directly from the water column, like you see here? Not only that, but have you tried removing detritus from aqua soil? It's not fun to do. So depending on how much livestock you have, you've got aqua soil, plus you have a never-ending amount of poop going into and onto the aqua soil. So unless you have a high enough plant load, and in most cases, eventually you're not going to ever be able to have enough plants unless you start removing some of that detritus. It's all pretty much maddening for someone who keeps all of these aquarium plants without any substrate at all. Listen to some of these explanations that these educational content chasing creators come up with in their videos. Now, some of them, granted, they're using promo codes and they're getting free stuff from these companies. So, I don't blame them for tailoring what they say and how they say it to try to help sell those products. I mean, you got to make a living, right? But the reality is that it's not necessary. Is there a time and place for it? Yeah, and I'm sorry I said I would get to that and I didn't. So, if you have a 20-gallon aquarium with one betta fish in it, you're not going to create enough detritus to fertilize a jungle of plants. It just isn't going to work. The plants are going to suffer and you may even start to grow algae because you don't have a full enough spectrum of nutrients to support all of the plants. And I'm not saying that detritus doesn't have enough of a spectrum. Detritus contains every single thing your plants need. But if you're growing a type of plant that wants all the iron out of that detritus, if there's just a little tiny bit of detritus, what you're left with is other stuff, but no iron. And some type of algae might thrive in that environment, but your plants don't. So, iron is a good subject to get onto next because a lot of the focus when it comes to dirted plants, dirted aquariums, or aquariums that use soil or dirt in the bottom, comes from a book that was written about dirted aquariums. And that entire basis of that method of planted aquarium using dirt in the bottom. And we're not talking about dirt with a special magic dust that makes the tank clean itself. The person that wrote the book never went into that level of snake oil salesmanship. But this book on dirted aquariums, the entire basis of the dirt method was based on the fact that they claimed that detritus, right? They were smart enough to understand that the argument wasn't about gravel. Gravel is just rocks. Obviously, plants cannot eat gravel. So when you're comparing a gravel substrate to a dirted substrate, what you're really comparing, and this is just another thing that those other channels don't talk about, not because they don't understand it, but because in order to acknowledge it, they're telling on themselves, right? When you're comparing gravel to soil, you're really comparing detritus to soil because the plants don't eat the rocks in the bottom of this aquarium. They're eating the detritus. That makes sense? So, one of the biggest flaws is that, well, wouldn't that mean that if you have aqua soil but the same amount of livestock, that you're double dosing your plants, right? So, what the book on soil says that everyone loves to quote is that detritus or fish poop or mulm, whatever you want to call it, does not have enough iron. And what I want you to understand is when I actually sent my detritus to that lab, it was, I believe, $20 or less for the test. And they tested it not one way, but two ways. They tested my detritus while it was wet, and then they dried it out and they tested it while it was dry. And that's very important to know both of those readings, right? But one of the things that it was most rich in is iron. And did the book on dirted substrate provide any test results at all? Absolutely not. Not a single test was done on detritus. But the claim was made that it lacks iron. And because of that, for over a decade, you have hobbyists on sites like Reddit or YouTube that love to pretend to be educators. They love to pretend to be experts and inform people, typically newer people to the hobby, that detritus lacks iron. That's just simply not a statement that you can make. Even if your detritus doesn't have enough iron, it doesn't mean that the aquarium directly next to it doesn't have enough iron. It doesn't mean that my aquariums don't have enough iron. So you could see how it's a little bit frustrating to know the truth about how these aquarium plants grow and the impact that the waste of our livestock has on growing aquarium plants, and to see it pretty much ignored in the hobby by an echo chamber. And that's one of the things, I know AI has kind of a bad reputation in the hobby, and it's getting better. AI, without a doubt, is getting much, much better. But AI is learning from these Reddit posts. AI is learning from these YouTube transcripts. So if you can't get AI to give you a real answer on an aquarium related subject, you have nothing but the aquarium hobby to blame for that. If you're a creator and you can't get AI to give you a straight answer on a particular subject, that's your cue to make a video, because AI isn't just making this stuff up, it's referencing stuff that humans put onto the internet. That's my point with that. So if you ask AI today if breeding a mono shrimp is hard to do, AI is going to tell you, yeah, it's extremely advanced. Why? Because all of the humans for decades have said that. Now, here I am, which I took out over 100, close to 150 baby Amano shrimp out of this tank yesterday. But here I am breeding Amano shrimp. I'm not a genius. I didn't go to school. I didn't go to shrimp school to learn how to breed Amano shrimp. I'm breeding Amano shrimp. The hardest thing that I do is look at the back of the bag of aquarium salt when I mix the salt water for the grow out tank. That's the hardest part of it, is putting salt and water in a bucket and turning on the wave maker to mix it up, or using a big spoon to mix up the salt. It's not hard to do. The problem is AI has learned from overcomplicated videos that had to rely on the most complex explanations possible, full of keywords and microscopes and all this other stuff, that AI's perception that we humans created for it is, yeah, breeding a mono shrimp's really hard to do. Now, AI is going to tell you breeding these nano fish that you see on screen here is pretty impossible to do as well. Now, although no one has successfully bred these little nano fish in a home aquarium, right? We have to correct that too. These nano fish breed all on their own in a home aquarium. Just like the Amano shrimp, their babies have to be transitioned to salt water and then back to fresh water. No one's ever done it. Never been done before on film. So you can guess where I'm going with that, right? So that's kind of the challenge for creators in 2026. And not because I made the challenge, it's because AI has gotten better than ever before at understanding nonsensical explanations to things. And this is going to put a lot of creators that have kind of based their entire channel on trying to plug scientific sounding jargon into nonsensical explanations of how aquarium plants grow. It's going to put those creators into a little bit of a strange situation in 2026 and beyond, because the AI algorithm of YouTube has gotten really, really good in a very short amount of time. So, yeah, it's true. A lot of the complaints that you might have on AI based on how you used it yesterday made sense yesterday, but you might get a completely different answer that's the right answer today based on what AI learned in 24 hours. AI's ability to understand what us humans type into the internet or film for social media is getting better and better. And at this point in the game, AI is able to scan, for instance, this live stream in real time and see that I'm showing a high contrast, beautiful planted aquarium with a reflective, shiny bottom that has absolutely no substrate in it. AI is able to reference known scientific journals, not jargon filled 2 hour squats on a live stream full of scientific names to replace actual understanding of plant science. AI, in a split second, can reference hundreds of known studies that took place before YouTube was even a popular place for you to get that how to information. And it's able to put those two things together to figure out whether or not I'm full of detritus, right? Or, other ways of saying that. So, my challenge to you is to collect some of that fluffy brown stuff from the bottom of your aquarium. Go to Google and put in soil and wastewater analysis lab near me. You might get lucky. It might be like $5 for the test. It might be $10 for the test. It's not expensive, however much it is. And what you'll learn about what's in the bottom of your aquarium should be and will be invaluable to you as an aquarist to keep your plants happy and healthy. Because before you go filling up the bottom of an aquarium with root tabs, or before you go adding liquid fertilizer to your water column, if you have a pre existing factory of plant fertilizer in your livestock that is 24 hours a day producing fertilizer, why would you remove it and put a root tab in there? Right? So that's the kind of understanding that the hobby would prefer that you don't have when it comes to aquarium plants. So it's an interesting thing. And over my time doing this, I have had a lot of people that like to point out little things about the way that the plants look in these aquariums. And I've had a lot of people point out some very positive things about how the plants look. But right here in the middle of the screen, what you see there is an Amazon sword. And for whatever reason, Amazon swords are have this like hilarious effect on the experts on social media that love just giving out advice based on crap that they read on other creators' videos. They're not actually studying plants. They don't actually understand active and passive transport of nutrients. They have no idea how any of that works. But they see an Amazon sword and it's like a parrot trying to get a little treat. Polly want a cracker? They cannot help themselves when they see an Amazon sword. They have to say, heavy root feeder, use root tabs. It's like a knee-jerk reaction for the Amazon sword. And now, that being said, if you've ever owned an Amazon sword, once you've had it in your aquarium for a couple months, those roots will be all through your substrate. And the way a lot of aquarists figure that out is when you go to move an Amazon sword or remove an Amazon sword, that's when you really get a full idea of just how much those roots travel through that substrate. Does that mean it's a heavy root feeder, or does it mean that the roots of the plants have to grow really big to hold down the giant mass of leaves so the plant doesn't float away? Are the roots of the plants growing to a size that correlates with the overall size of the plant? I mean, that's common sense stuff. When you look at the silhouette of a tree, right? A big old oak tree, the roots of that tree are giant. And it's because they need to hold that tree up. It's because they need to feed that size of a plant. So to look at a big sword plant, which this one looks big in relation to the plants around it and the shrimp, but it's really not that big of a plant. But to look at a sword plant and say to yourself, heavy root feeder, you don't understand how sword plants work. And without a doubt, you have no idea what percentage of the plant is taking in nutrients from the leaves versus the roots. What if it's in bare gravel, right? Or even worse, what if it's planted in sand and there's no root tabs? It's just brand new, clean sand. In the case of that type of aquarium setup, it's not really going to be feeding it all from the roots. It's going to have to be relying on taking in nutrients from the leaves because the detritus is not going to break down into the sand. It doesn't work that way. Maybe the first top layer of the sand, but it's not going to work its way all throughout the substrate like it would with gravel. And even then, again, aquatic plants, whether fully aquatic or semi aquatic, like amphibious plants, they all want the nutrients from the water. They prefer their nutrients to come directly from the water column. These plants do not want the nutrients to come from substrate because it takes up their energy to process the nutrients that way. That's just known science about plants. I'm not making it up. I'm not just trying to plug all the fancy scientific names of my livestock and my plant. I'm not filling this live stream with 3-second clips because I'm afraid you're going to stop watching and click away if I don't keep you mesmerized. I'm just a guy explaining the real truth of how this works. And unfortunately, common sense is not common. But luckily, YouTube, and especially the browse and the recommended tabs, are run by an algorithm that understands reality. So I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure you check out my channel if you're interested in breeding things that they say are really hard to breed, but doing it in a way that's actually really, really easy to do. So I'm guessing you know what projects are coming. And if you don't, we've got Amano shrimp here in colors. That's right. If you didn't know this yet, which it's funny to see how many people find out for the first time when they see my white Amano shrimp. That's right. Those are Amano shrimp. Those are not snow neocaridina shrimp. Those are Amano shrimp, and I breed them using really easy methods that require little to no work or effort or money. Here are some orange ones that I'm breeding to try to get the most red coloration possible out of them. It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, if you go to AI and ask AI if this is easy to do, it's going to tell you no, it's hard to do. Look at these yellow ones. That is as beautiful as a yellow neocaridina shrimp, but it's not. It's the king of the algae eaters, the Amano shrimp, the #1 cleanup crew shrimp. If you've got algae, no matter what kind of algae you've got, the Amano shrimp is ready to take care of it for you. You can see here just how much bigger than that orange eye neocaridina that Amano shrimp is. But that's the kind of stuff I'm doing. So if you're interested in that, make sure you check out the channel. See you in the next one.